Well, thank you very much. And let me start by sort of setting my stopwatch so I don't go over time. But let me begin by thanking Ram Madhav and the India Foundation for giving me the opportunity to be here. It's really a privilege to be here with all of you. My institution, the American Foreign Policy Council, is in Washington. We're actually on Capitol Hill, the place where debates never really end. They just go around and around. And so it's very nice to come out and talk to a different audience and perhaps hear some new thoughts. And I've certainly heard a great deal today. And I actually thought this was a great way to sort of to finish out the panel, because from the general we heard about the past and the sort of the evolution of instability in West Asia, in the greater Middle East. From Dr. Pipes and Dr. Yevseyev, we heard about the present. Sort of what the situation is now and sort of what needs to be done in the near future. So I thought in my time I would talk about the future and what we can expect from the region and how we need to respond. I want to start where Dr. Yevseyev finished, which is with regard to the Islamic State. Over the last 2 years, since early 2014, the rapid takeover of parts of Iraq and subsequently of parts of Syria by that group, the group that's popularly known as the Islamic State or ISIS or Daesh or however you classify it, has captivated global attention. And it has captured attention, and its unbridled brutality has held international attention. And so the media today is filled with images and narratives of the sort of the brutality and the hostility of life under the caliphate. And as a result, very logically, the Islamic State has become the near singular focus of international counterterrorism policy, certainly of the Western response to contemporary terrorism. But I would posit that the struggle against ISIS is only one part of a much larger contest. And something that's going to require sustained attention and sustained coordination over the next several years. So I thought I'd spend a few minutes talking about what that field is going to look like. And I would argue that there are really 5 trends that we need to focus on in the next several years. The first does indeed have to do with the Islamic State or the potential of the Islamic State in decline. So, by way of reference, at the height of its power in late 2014 and early 2015, the territory of the Islamic State covered 81,000 square miles, which is roughly equivalent to the size of the United Kingdom. And it held sway over a population of 8 million civilians, roughly analogous to the population of the country of Switzerland. During that time, ISIS was estimated by U.S. intelligence sources and private intelligence institutions to be generating revenue of approximately $1 billion annually, making it the richest, most well-funded and well-resourced threat group in modern history. Today, the fortunes of the Islamic State have declined considerably. As a result of coalition pressure, as a result of hard power, direct action, and soft power pressure on the Islamic State's resources, the group's reach has been eroded significantly. As of this past summer, the British intelligence consultant, the IHS Janes, estimated that ISIS had lost a quarter of its total territory, roughly the size of Ireland, and its finances had declined by roughly half as well. This is attributable certainly to the bright spots in Western counterterrorism policy, in particular what U.S. government officials call the Line 5 effort, which is the effort to counter ISIS financing through targeting its various income streams. These setbacks on the part of the Islamic State have forced changes to the group's modus operandi, and it's forced it to implement cost-cutting measures, such as slashing the salaries of its foreign fighters. But is the Islamic State truly on the ropes? The conventional wisdom in Washington is that ISIS is now in terminal decline, just like we said Al-Qaeda was several years ago. I would make the argument that the answer is no. Despite all of these setbacks that I mentioned, the Islamic State is a resilient actor, and it's still a capable actor, which has a diverse funding stream, right? Everything from black market energy trade to, most importantly, taxation of the citizens under its control. These elements continue to challenge the ability of the United States and its allies to neutralize them. In addition, the Islamic State still has global reach. The group has succeeded in fielding at least 6 what it calls armies, functioning armies, in Libya, in Egypt, in Nigeria, in Saudi Arabia, in Yemen, and in Afghanistan, as well as multiple independent cells that are inspired by its ideologies. And what this means is that it's still possible to envision, no matter how successful the coalition is in the near future, it's still possible to envision a caliphate, maybe a smaller caliphate, a caliphate that is geographically smaller, but territorially and economically sustainable. In other words, we can envision a future in which the Islamic State is degraded, but it's not totally depleted. And we need to contend with that future. The second trend that we need to focus on is the groups that have tethered themselves to the Islamic State itself. Today, no fewer than 34 separate radical groups from virtually every region in the world have made common cause with ISIS or have pledged bayat, pledged allegiance to its emir, to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. And these factions are going to inevitably be affected by the current path of decline that is being seen on the part of the Islamic State. But these groups are not going to go away as a result, and I think it's facile to think so. In virtually all of the cases, except for the groups that have sprung up in Syria themselves, these organizations predate the creation of the Islamic State and have autonomous personnel, infrastructure, and operational capabilities. A great example in this regard is Boko Haram in Nigeria, which has split over the question of allegiance to the Islamic State, but both halves of the larger Boko Haram whole maintain autonomous capability and will continue to be a threat, both nationally in Nigeria, but also regionally in Central Africa. And so as a result, the decline of the Islamic State could usher in the era of diffuse, localized jihad, where its former partners, the former partners of the Islamic State, in the absence of a coherent central guidance, begin to seek to promote their own radical visions for their respective regions. And this is something that we, as allies, need to be prepared for. The third trend that we need to account for is the future of al-Qaeda. We all know that the Islamic State is a spawn of al-Qaeda. It is a product of al-Qaeda and an evolution of al-Qaeda ideology. And we also know that over the past 3 years, the two groups have become bitter rivals, and they've competed for what we call hearts and minds throughout the Islamic world with regard to affiliation and allegiance. In that contest, the Islamic State has won, at least so far. But what is less well understood, I would argue, is what has happened to al-Qaeda as a result. Because you've seen a pretty significant evolution of al-Qaeda's own ideology and modus operandi in response to the innovations that the Islamic State has made. And as a result, today, the organization holds more territory than at any time in its history up until now. From Yemen to Syria to Afghanistan, al-Qaeda has become entrenched on large parcels of territory, exploiting empty political space in conflict zones, and exploiting the local reaction, the local aversion to the excesses of the Islamic State to promote itself as a, would you believe, moderate alternative. And it's succeeding. This long-term strategy, moreover, it has benefited tremendously from a lack of sustained attention, at least on the part of the United States. We in the United States have been preoccupied with the Islamic State, or what some of us call the shiny object, the object that is capturing all of the media attention and sucking up all of the oxygen in the room. And because we have allowed al-Qaeda to continue to flourish in the shadows on these peripheral regions where it is now making its base. And by doing so, the bin Laden network has laid the groundwork for a long-term strategic presence as a global actor. The fourth trend that we need to focus on is a new generation of jihadists. Over the last half-decade, the struggle between the regime of Bashar al-Assad in Syria and its political opponents has steadily transformed from a local conflict, from a civil war, into a global jihad. Thanks to the influx of tens of thousands of foreign extremists, you could say that Syria has become the new Afghanistan. It's become a crucible for today's terrorists and an indoctrination and breeding ground for tomorrow's terrorists. And the analogy to Afghanistan is, I think, very instructive. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 touched off what we know as the first jihad, the mass mobilization of radicals throughout the Muslim world. And over the years that followed, thousands made their way to Southwest Asia to wage jihad against the Soviet Union. All told, scholars estimate that as many as 20,000 foreign fighters joined the ranks of the Afghan Mujahideen in the decade between 1979 and the end of the war in 1989. Over time, this network became a true network. It became battle-hardened, it became field-tested, and it became closely coordinating. And once the Afghan jihad ended, some of these alumni sought out other conflicts, such as Chechnya or in the Balkans, and others returned to their own home countries to carry out subversion at a local level. But today, the foreign fighter problem that is being incubated in Syria has the potential to be much worse than what we saw during the 1990s. This is because since its rise to prominence in Iraq and Syria in 2014, 2015, the Islamic State is estimated to have attracted on the order of 31,000 foreign fighters, right? So put another way, the Islamic State in 2.5, 3 years has marshaled more than 1.5 times as many foreign fighters as joined the Afghan jihad throughout the entire decade of the 1980s. And as the Syrian civil war winds down, if and when it does, because all wars must inevitably end, we can expect to see a massive outflow of Syrian alumni in ways that are going to destabilize the regions where they come from, including places like Central Asia, places like Russia, and also in South Asia and Southeast Asia as well. The fifth trend is one that is talked about, I think, far less, but it bears noting, and that is the threat that's posed by a reinvigorated Iranian threat network. The contemporary focus on ISIS, at least in the United States, has diverted attention from the growing potential for Shiite religious radicalism, a phenomenon which is causally linked to the expanding capabilities and strategic ambitions of the Islamic Republic of Iran. As a result of the nuclear deal signed between Iran and the P5+1 powers last summer, the Iranian regime has received what amounts to an enormous economic windfall, one that encompasses upwards of $100 billion in direct economic relief, as well as billions upon billions of dollars of defense-related and energy-related post-sanctions trade. And this has set the Iranian economy, which was previously rickety, on a path of, well, still modest, but certainly growth. And as Iran's economy has stabilized, its strategic ambitions have expanded. Over the last year and a half, among many other initiatives, the Iranian regime has deepened its military footprint in Syria in support of the Assad regime. It has redoubled its investment in Shiite militias operating in Iraq. It has provided extensive military assistance to Yemen's Houthi rebels and empowered their political rise. Right? And the list goes on. The cumulative effect of this is that you could today say that Iran is in control of 4 separate Arab capitals in the greater Middle East. It is in control of Beirut, Lebanon. It is in control of Damascus, Syria. It is in control of Baghdad, Iraq. And it's in control of Sana'a, Yemen. This has 2, I would argue, important implications for the United States and its coalition allies. First is that we are very likely to see a surge in capabilities of radical groups that are supported and funded by Iran. even before the lifting of multilateral sanctions as a result of the nuclear deal, Iran was estimated by the US government to be spending between $3.5 billion and $16 billion a year on the support of groups like Hezbollah and Hamas. Given the importance of these proxies in Iran's strategic foreign policy, as force multipliers, as asymmetric allies, we can expect these contributions to grow as Iran's economy becomes more and more solvent. The second trend line, and I think it's a very ominous one, is Iran's complicity in a secondary and less known foreign fighter flow. We talked about a lot over the last day about foreign fighter flows into the Iraq-Syria battle space in support of the Islamic State. We haven't yet talked about the idea that Iran is supporting and directing a secondary Shiite fighter flow, state-directed, very narrowly tailored, but implicating radicals from Afghanistan, from Pakistan, from Iraq, from Yemen, and flowing into Syria in support of the Assad regime to fight against the Islamic State as well as other forces there. This trend line is significant precisely because it is state-directed. If the worry about foreign fighters flowing out of Syria and Iraq after the war is that it will be an undirected stream and these fighters will go wherever they choose, there is worry that Iran, which has weaponized foreign fighters in its fight in Syria, could weaponize them again in the future against other countries. So where does that leave us? For the United States and its allies, the contemporary focus on ISIS is logical because of political promises, because of the new administration in Washington, which has hung its strategic hat on the idea that we will erode and degrade the Islamic State. But our counterterrorism policy over the long term has to be broader. It has to be more strategic. And it must anticipate the future complexion of the battlefield, as I've laid it out. Right? There's a difference between rhetoric and political rhetoric and reality and the allocation of resources. In this process, I think we're going to see over the next year a very significant evolution in official Washington's thinking. But I hope, sincerely, that what we also see is far greater investment in international cooperation in combating the future complexion of the battlefield, and also in beginning a serious process in the discussion of what Dr. Pipes talked about, which is the centrality of ideology to the spread, to the proliferation of these trends. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.